Long ago, before monsters and legends began twisting her name, Medusa was just a girl, a quiet girl, a priestess. She lived not in shadows but in sunlight, in a temple of stone and silence built in honor of the goddess Athena. Her world was one of order, of rituals, of quiet steps and careful hands. She had never known power, not in the way gods knew it. She had never asked for it either. Her life was simple, measured. She swept the temple floor before dawn. She lit the incense slowly, watching the smoke curl like soft thread through the air. Her prayers were silent, always silent. She believed that the goddess heard best when words were not forced. The temple sat near the sea. On days when the winds were strong, salt carried through the columns and rested in the folds of her robes. Fishermen would pass, bowing slightly as they crossed the marble steps. No one entered without reason. The temple was sacred, not grand, but steady, and Medusa moved through it like a breath through a quiet room. They say she was beautiful, but not in the way poets describe. Not the kind of beauty that demanded songs or started wars. Her beauty was the kind that lingered after she left a room. The kind that made people stop and wonder why the space felt calmer when she was near. She never noticed, or maybe she did, but never let it show. Athena had chosen her, or at least, the priest said so. It was an honor to serve the goddess of wisdom, an even greater honor to do so in silence. Medusa never questioned this, never thought to ask why gods would need temples at all. She simply served. She was content. In those early days, no one called her a monster. At night, the temple walls held a gentle warmth. The marble cooled slowly after sundown. Medusa would lie near the statue of Athena, wrapped in a thin wool blanket, listening to the soft creak of stone shifting with temperature. It was not a lonely life, not really. The presence of the goddess was constant. The rituals gave shape to her hours, and the sea was always there, just beyond the walls. The people who visited the temple came with questions, not loud ones, quiet ones. Should I marry? Should I sail? Why has my son stopped speaking? The kind of questions that didn't need answers, just a place to be asked. And Medusa listened. She did not respond. That was not her role. But people left lighter, as if just being in her presence helped them breathe differently. She wore robes of linen, always modest, always clean. Her hair was long, dark, and tied back simply. She never wore jewelry. She never raised her voice. She did not dance in festivals or join parades. She was set apart, and that set apartness gave her a kind of reverence among the people. They didn't see her as one of them, but they respected her all the same. Medusa's mother had once told her that the sea could swallow sound, that if you screamed into a storm, the ocean would carry your voice so far, not even the gods could hear it. Medusa often wondered if that was true, but she never tried it. Her voice remained with her, kept safe, folded neatly like the edges of her tunic. As the seasons changed, Medusa's duties remained steady. The temple needed her, or so she believed. She had no ambitions beyond the stone walls, no desire to see the bustling markets or hear the laughter of girls her age. Down in the village, the temple was enough, the goddess was enough. But the gods are never still for long. They shift, like tides, like wind. What pleases them one day might offend them the next. Mortals build rituals to make sense of this, to keep the divine mood stable. But Medusa, who had followed every rule, who had spoken every prayer correctly, was about to find out that the gods do not reward order with mercy. Something was coming. It would not arrive loudly, not at first. It would slip in quietly, like water beneath a door. And when it came, Medusa would no longer be remembered as the quiet girl who swept the temple floor. She would become the thing that people whispered about, the name carved into myths and warnings, the face no one dared to look at. But for now, she remained as she had always been, still, steady, watching the sea, listening to the silence of stone, and waiting for a goddess who never truly listened back. It began with a ripple, a feeling in the air. The temple's silence, once comforting, felt different now, like it was waiting for something. The stone seemed colder, the incense didn't rise as easily. Even the sea outside grew restless, waves slapping harder against the rocks. Medusa noticed, but said nothing. There was no one to say it to. She kept to her rituals, lit the lamps, swept the sand from the steps, replaced the olive oil near the altar. Everything was the same, and yet, it wasn't. Then came the visitor, not a fisherman, not a mother with a quiet question, not even one of the temple priests. He was a god, Poseidon, god of the sea, brother of Zeus, loud, proud, and not known for quiet visits. But that day, he came like a breeze, smooth, confident, smiling. He stepped into the temple, as if it were his own. He wasn't supposed to be there. The temple belonged to Athena. Gods respected such boundaries, or at least, they were supposed to. But Poseidon did not ask permission. He never did. Medusa turned, startled to see him. She had never met a god before. She had only heard stories. They always sounded powerful, distant, majestic. But this one smiled too much. His eyes didn't look at her. They looked through her, like he had already decided something. He spoke softly, too softly. His voice was smooth like polished stone. He said he admired the temple, said he admired her, said it was strange for someone so lovely to live in such silence. Medusa didn't answer. She wasn't supposed to. But his presence felt wrong, off, heavy. She stepped back. He stepped forward. What happened next has many versions. Some say he seduced her. Some say he forced himself upon her. Others claim she welcomed it, though that part never rings true. What we do know is that whatever happened, it happened inside the temple, at Athena's altar, where prayers were whispered and all burned day and night. The temple shook that night. The sea roared louder than usual. And by morning, Medusa was different. Not visibly. Not yet. But inside, something had cracked. The silence no longer comforted her. The stone no longer felt safe. The prayers caught in her throat like dust. She tried to return to her routines. Lit the lamps, cleaned the floors, but her hands trembled. Her eyes burned. She had served the goddess faithfully for years, and now, her temple had been turned into something unholy. She waited for Athena. She prayed for guidance, for protection, for justice, and Athena came, but not with comfort. The goddess appeared in light and wind, her eyes cold, her face unreadable. She did not ask what had happened. She did not offer sympathy. She saw the altar. She saw Medusa, and her judgment was swift. She called it desecration. She called it a stain on her temple. And Medusa, who had never once broken a vow, was now blamed for everything. The punishment was cruel. Athena reached out with divine hands, and twisted what was once gentle into something feared. Medusa's hair writhed, turned to serpents. Her eyes burned with a power that turned men to stone. Her once quiet presence became unbearable. Her beauty, the kind that calmed rooms, became the kind that shattered statues. No longer a priestess, no longer a girl. A monster, not because of what she did, but because of what had been done to her. Because gods do not like their temples stained, and they do not like their pride questioned. Medusa fled. The temple, once her home, now rejected her. Her footsteps echoed as she ran. The marble no longer welcomed her. The sea no longer soothed her. She ran until the trees grew thick, until the land forgot roads, until the world forgot her name. She found a cave, dark, hidden, far from people. She curled into it like a frightened animal. The snakes that had once been hair hissed in confusion. Her reflection, once a quiet face, now frightened even herself. And there, in that cave, she remained. Not because she wanted to hide, but because the world had no place for her anymore. She had served faithfully. She had been silent. And still, she was punished. Now, stories would be told about a monster in a cave, with hair of serpents and a gaze that killed. But no one would mention the temple. No one would speak of the sea god, or the silence that came before. They would only remember the curse. The girl, forgotten. Time passed, though Medusa could no longer measure it. Days and nights blurred inside the cave. Outside, the wind whispered through the rocks. Inside, there was only the steady sound of dripping water and the quiet hissing of snakes. She had no mirror, no sunlight, no reflection, but she learned not to miss her old face. Her hands still worked. She could gather stones and shape them, stack them into small towers. She would knock them down gently, then build them up again. The world, it seemed, had forgotten her, except for the occasional intruder. Hunters, soldiers, wanderers, men, who had heard whispers of a monster in the hills. They came with weapons and confidence, believing they were brave. They never expected her to be quiet, to not move, to wait until they rounded the final corner. Then one glance, and silence. Some fell mid-step, some with swords raised. Their bodies froze where they stood, eyes wide, statues in strange poses, as if surprised by their own stillness. Medusa didn't enjoy it. She didn't even hate them. They came. They turned to stone. She dragged them outside and lined them near the cliff. A warning, perhaps. Or maybe company. Their silent presence became part of the landscape. Crows perched on their heads. Moss crept up their legs. Rain washed over their frozen eyes. Sometimes she gave them names, told them stories in the dark, pretended they were listening. She missed conversation. She missed silence, too, but only the right kind. Not the silence of stone, or shame, or divine punishment. She missed the quiet of routine, the hush of prayer, the soft clatter of pottery in the early morning. Once, a girl wandered close. Lost, maybe, young and alone. Medusa stayed in the shadows, watched her from behind the vines. The girl picked wild berries, unaware of the danger. Medusa said nothing. The girl hummed a song, something familiar, something from the coast. Medusa didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly. Eventually, the girl left. No statues that day, and Medusa smiled, just barely. But her story was growing. Whispers carried through taverns and ship decks. Some said she was a cursed spirit. Others claimed she guarded treasure. A few believed she was Athena herself, twisted by grief. None were true. She was just Medusa, a woman with serpents for hair, a gaze that turned the brave to stone, and a heart that had once longed only to serve the gods. One night, she found an owl watching her. It didn't blink, didn't flinch. Its eyes were steady, gold and wide. She stared back. She didn't turn it to stone. That night, she sat by the entrance of her cave, letting the moonlight touch her face. The snakes on her head were calm, resting, breathing with her. She remembered her sisters, Athena and Euryale, strong, loud, immortal. They had stayed behind. Or perhaps they had wandered far from the world, tired of it. She missed them, not the constant chatter, but the warmth, the reminder that she had once been part of something. She whispered their names into the wind. Athena, Euryale. Her voice cracked. She hadn't spoken out loud in weeks. No one answered, but she kept whispering. Names, memories, pieces of her old life. She wasn't trying to summon anyone. She just didn't want to forget. Even monsters need memories. Even cursed ones need someone to talk to, even if it's just the wind. And still, the world kept moving. Kings rose, cities fell. Sailors sailed past her island without knowing she watched from the cliffs. Statues stood quietly near the edges, overgrown now, almost beautiful in their stillness. Sometimes, she carved little shapes from stone, birds, leaves, faces she half remembered. She lined them along the cave wall. A gallery of forgotten moments, a temple of her own perhaps. She never prayed anymore, not to Athena, not to Poseidon, not even to the stars. But she still lit little lamps when she could, with bits of oil and driftwood. Let the flame flicker gently, not for a goddess but for herself. Because even in exile, some rituals were worth keeping. There are certain things the world never tires of telling. Stories of monsters, stories of heroes, and sometimes, they collide. Medusa did not know how far her legend had spread. She didn't see the travelers whispering her name in the marketplaces. She didn't hear the old sailors speak of the cursed cave beneath the cliffs. But the stories found their way into the ears of kings. And one day, they reached a queen. Dano, mother of Perseus, whispered to her son not of glory, but of survival. Perseus had grown up on island sands, knowing only exile and worrying. And yet the world had plans for him. Or perhaps, the gods did. King Polydex, eager to rid himself of the young man, asked for a wedding gift no ordinary person could bring. The head of Medusa. The room had gone still. Everyone knew the tale. The snakes, the stair, the garden of statues. But Perseus agreed, not because he wanted to, but because he had little choice. That is how many quests begin. Far from the island, in the folds of the heavens, Athena watched, her expression unreadable. She had once punished Medusa. Now she guided the hand that would one day end her. Strange, how the gods move. They sent Perseus gifts, a bronze shield so polished it shone like still water, a curved blade, winged sandals, a bag to carry the unthinkable, and most importantly a helmet of invisibility. Not to honor him, really, but to ensure the story unfolded the way it always did. Meanwhile, Medusa was quiet. She had no visions, no warnings. The stars above were the same as the night before. The cave slept. The wind murmured across the stone statues. Then one night, a dream. She saw herself young again, at the temple, braiding her hair, laughing. Then the sound of wings. She woke. Something had changed in the air. Not louder, just shifted. A stillness she hadn't felt before. Medusa rose. She walked the familiar tunnel. Her fingers traced the walls. Her snakes lifted their heads. Not afraid, exactly, but alert, listening. Outside, the moon was round and high, and somewhere, just out of sight, Perseus was approaching. Not boldly, not stomping like the others, not shouting her name or waving a blade. He came silently, clever, careful. He had been told not to look directly. He used the shield as a mirror, walking backward through the cave. He saw her only as a reflection, distant, shimmery, almost dreamlike. Medusa was not hiding. She stood near the back, where the shadows held her gently. Her eyes were open, her arms by her side. The snakes hissed softly, not in anger, in warning, but it was too late. The blade was swift, quieter than thunder, quieter than judgment. And in that moment she did not scream. She did not beg. She simply let go. Her head, still crowned with serpents, was placed gently into the bag. And just like that, the cave was quiet again. The statues remained. The wind carried on. The drip of water continued. The story, however, had changed. Perseus would fly home. He would show the head to kings. He would freeze tyrants with a glance. He would hang it as a trophy. People would cheer. They would call him brave. They would say he defeated a monster. They would forget the temple, the prayer beads, the girl who once smiled at the sunrise. The gods rarely explained themselves. They rarely wept, but perhaps, that night, Athena looked down and remembered. And perhaps Medusa, in the final moment, had known this story was never hers to shape. Still, in the quiet, something else began to stir. For even in death, the myth was not finished. From Medusa's blood, two beings were said to be born. Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the golden giant. They rose from the earth like dreams too powerful to stay buried. They were not monsters. They were symbols of something else, something no curse could fully contain. And high above, the stars shifted. A new constellation would take shape one day. Not Perseus, not Athena, but Medusa, so that the sky would remember what the world forgot. Perseus flew through the sky, clutching the satchel that held the head of Medusa. The weight of his journey was not only physical but strangely spiritual. He had killed a creature that was both feared and pitied, a monster shaped by divine cruelty and mortal misfortune. Her head, even in death, still possessed the ability to turn men to stone. It didn't scream or shout. It didn't curse or cry. It simply existed, holding power in its silence. As Perseus soared over the wide deserts of Libya, a curious thing began to happen. A few drops of blood slipped from the satchel and fell onto the sand below. The myth says that wherever the blood of Medusa touched the earth, serpents were born, small, coiled things that slithered across the warm ground. The people of ancient times would later say that's why the deserts of Libya became home to so many snakes. A quiet legacy of a fallen priestess. In other tellings, the drops of blood created more than just snakes. They birthed terrifying creatures or, in a softer version, powerful medicinal herbs. Some say that Asclepius, the god of medicine, used Medusa's blood to develop life-saving cures. Her body, once cursed and feared, was now seen as a source of healing and strength, a paradox wrapped in myth, that the most cursed being could also bring life and protection. When Perseus returned to the island of Seriphos, he found his mother Danae still under threat. The king, Polydex, had continued to pressure her into marriage. Perseus, without saying a word, reached into the bag. He pulled out the head of Medusa and showed it to the king and his court. In an instant, all of them turned to stone. No sword was drawn, no argument made, just a face, a silent expression, surrounded by lifeless snakes, and everything stopped. The story does not linger on how Perseus felt in that moment. Did he feel triumph, relief, or perhaps confusion, holding a head that was once human, that still punished the world for what had been done to her? That detail is, like so many others in Greek myth, left to silence. Eventually, Perseus gave the head to Athena, the very goddess who had once punished Medusa for being violated in her temple. Rather than destroy it, Athena placed the head on her shield, the Aegis. From then on, wherever Athena went into battle, the face of Medusa went with her. It was no longer just a head. It was a symbol, a weapon, a sacred emblem. The irony is difficult to ignore. The woman who was once condemned for desecrating a temple now became divine protection. Her face, once hidden, was now held high by the goddess herself. Warriors saw it not as a tale of sorrow but as a source of courage. Enemies who faced it turned to stone, not from magic alone, but perhaps also from the weight of history it carried. Still, Medusa never speaks in the myths. Not before her transformation. Not during her years of isolation. Not even when she is killed. Her voice is never recorded. Her thoughts never shared. All that remains is the gaze. The one thing the gods gave her when they took everything else away. Some modern readers look at her story and see a metaphor. They see a woman wronged, punished by those in power, and turned into a weapon so that others could benefit from her pain. Others see her as a symbol of feminine rage, a warning about injustice, or even as a misunderstood victim of circumstance. But at the core, Medusa is simply a person who changed by the divine, changed by violence, and ultimately changed by time. Over the centuries, her image would continue to appear on the pediments of temples, in mosaics on Roman floors, carved onto breastplates and armor, always staring outward, always silent. People feared her, admired her, and sometimes didn't know what to make of her. Was she a monster, a goddess, a protector, or just a shadow of something the ancient world chose to forget? There are no temples to Medusa today, no official shrines, no offerings left for her in the corners of sanctuaries. And yet, her face is one of the most recognized in all of mythology. Her myth, despite being muted, survived. It passed through generations like a whisper, like something once shouted that faded with time. Some scholars believe Medusa represents the fear of the unknown, of the wild feminine, of unexplainable rage. Others argue she's a representation of transformation itself, from maiden to monster, from silence to symbol, from victim to power. But maybe, in the quiet hours of history, she was just a lonely girl who wanted to serve her goddess, and whose life was twisted by forces far beyond her control. She didn't ask for wings or snakes or stone-turning eyes. Those were given to her, not as gifts, but as chains. And still, in the end, her head didn't bring about endless terror or destruction. It stopped wars. It saved the weak. It protected cities. Perhaps that was the final twist of the gods, that what they meant as a punishment would become a shield. So if ever you see her face on an old statue or a dusty coin, remember that beneath the scales and stares and silence, there once lived a woman who never got to tell her story. She became a myth, a weapon, and a symbol. But she was always more than just the monster the world decided she had to be. She was Medusa. If you've stayed with us this long, thank you for listening. For more slow, quiet, and thoughtful journeys into forgotten history, subscribe to Midnight Historian. There are still many quiet stories left to uncover.